My name is Lila Anderson. I was born into a family where appearances mattered more than affection, where success was defined by Ivy League degrees, firm handshakes, and the ability to deliver a confident speech at the dinner table without a stutter. I wasn't particularly good at any of that. I was the quiet one, the girl who listened more than she spoke, who loved the sound of clinking pans more than clinking wine glasses. While my siblings competed for the attention of our father, a sharp-tongued corporate litigator, I spent my evenings in the kitchen with the staff learning how to reduce a sauce or perfect a soufflé. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I did, in the way a child clings to the hope that maybe one day they'll look up and say, "We see you. We're proud of you." But they never did. And I stopped waiting. That didn't mean I stopped showing up. When I got accepted into culinary school instead of law school, I was told it was a disappointment. When I opened my first bistro and invited them to the soft launch, no one came. My father once said to me at Christmas in front of the whole extended family, "Well, at least you're feeding people. That's more useful than some degrees." I smiled and passed him the gravy, because that's what I do. I smile, I move forward. I don't let them see the sting or the burn underneath. A few months ago, I received a group email titled Anderson Family Reunion Dinner, RSVP required. No personal note, no warmth. But I knew I was expected to be there. The event was to be held at Maison d'Or, one of the most exclusive private dining venues in the city. It was a celebration of Dad's semi-retirement, a transition of power to my older brother Jacob, now partner at the same firm. A proper torch-passing event. I RSVP'd without a comment. No one replied. The day of the dinner, I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed simply in a cream blouse and black slacks. I had a leather-bound envelope in my bag, but more on that later. When I entered, the maitre d' greeted me by name. "Miss Anderson," he said, with a slight nod that held far more recognition than my family had shown me in years. Then he glanced at the reservation book and frowned slightly. "Ah," he said, "I see you're listed under the patio section." I blinked. "I'm sorry." He hesitated, then showed me the list. My name, clearly written, was separated from the others, not at the main table in the grand dining room, but outside in the covered courtyard. I said nothing. I walked out to the patio. It was chilly despite the heaters. The courtyard was beautiful fairy lights above a trickling fountain nearby, but empty. My table was set for one. Inside, through the glass, I could see them all gathering. My brother in his tailored suit, my mother adjusting her pearl necklace, my father already swirling his wine. No one looked toward the courtyard. No one came out. A server brought me bread and water. "Are you not joining them inside?" she asked gently. I smiled and said, "Apparently, this is my place." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Would you like to see the wine list?" "I don't drink at family events," I said. "But please bring me whatever dessert the chef recommends." She smiled, the kind of smile that says she didn't understand everything, but she felt the weight of it. As I sat there alone, I heard laughter rise from inside. Toasts. My name wasn't mentioned. I was not missed. It was as if I were invisible. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what I had planned. They didn't know that I hadn't chosen Maison d'Or by accident. Because 3 years ago, when my second restaurant failed due to a dishonest investor, I met a man named Francois, an older French chef who'd been quietly saving up to open a new kind of dining experience in the city. We became business partners, silent ones, strategic ones, and Maison d'Or, it was ours. When the Andersons made their group reservation, Francois called me. "Should I tell them?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let's just host them well." And so we did. I watched them from the outside, eating, laughing, passing stories, as if nothing in the world had changed. As if I didn't exist. As if I were just a guest in a life I was born into. But I wasn't angry, not yet, because I had one last course to serve them. And it would taste a little different. Subscribe to hear how the family who exiled me from dinner got a full course lesson in respect, and how a $50,000 tip became the most expensive silence they ever paid for. The Andersons weren't just a family. We were a brand. That was something my father said often, half in jest, but always with a glint of truth in his voice. We're Andersons, he'd declare at parties, courtrooms, or charity galas. People trust us because we look like we know what we're doing. And that was the truth, looking like we knew what we were doing. My father built his firm from the ground up, and by the time I was in high school, we were the family people whispered about in gated communities and country clubs. My mother curated the perfect image: the garden parties, the matching outfits at holiday dinners, the family newsletters that made it look like everything was just right. But I always knew better. I was born second. Jacob, my brother, was the legacy. He had father's posture and mother's sharpness. From the moment he turned 10 and memorized his first Supreme Court ruling, everyone said he was destined. I was extra, quiet, different. I asked questions at the wrong time. I cried during movies. I liked making pies from scratch instead of memorizing statutes. When I was 9, I made a chocolate tart for Thanksgiving. I'd snuck into the kitchen early, worked with the housekeeper, followed every step. I brought it to the table with pride. Dad didn't even look up. "We don't serve dessert before dinner," he said flatly. Jacob got applause later for giving a toast he read from a note card. That was the rhythm of my childhood. I brought warmth. They rewarded coldness. I brought effort. They recognized pedigree. By high school, I stopped trying to be part of their rhythm. I took weekend cooking classes at the community center instead of Model UN. I applied to a culinary institute in New York. When I got the acceptance letter, my mother opened it first without asking. She placed it on the kitchen counter and said, "That's not a real degree, Lila. But if it makes you happy to play with food, fine." At my graduation, my parents didn't come. Jacob had a client presentation in D.C., and Mom said she had a migraine. Francois, the French chef I was apprenticing with at the time, stood in as my guest. He bought me a bouquet of white tulips and told me that food made people feel something law never could. That moment mattered more than any pat on the back I had chased for years. But despite all that, I kept showing up. When Jacob got engaged, I attended the party even though my invite came 3 days late. I brought wine. I stayed after to help clean. At the baby shower for his first child, I was assigned snack duty, then criticized for not labeling the gluten-free items. When my niece turned 5, I brought her a miniature baking kit. My sister-in-law thanked me but added, "She's more into numbers. Maybe next time a math game." Every interaction was a quiet dismissal. I was never excluded outright. That would have been too impolite for the Andersons. Instead, they positioned me just far enough away that I wouldn't disturb the picture. I started to think of myself as their favorite ghost. Until Maison d'Or? Until the night I sat outside like staff, like an afterthought, and realized they didn't even see that they were doing it anymore. They truly believed that was my place. But I didn't sit there feeling sorry for myself. I sat there and took notes. I watched who toasted first. Jacob, of course. I noticed how Dad corrected my cousin's story in front of everyone, how Mom clinked her glass and said, "To legacy, legacy." What a word. They were building legacy on exclusion, on appearances, on who was inside and who was outside the glass. And the more I listened, the more I realized. They weren't just rude. They were addicted to hierarchy. Addicted to the story where they sat at the center and I hovered quietly on the edge, seasoning their narrative, never shaping it. But they forgot something essential. The best stories aren't told from the head of the table. They're told by the one who serves the last course. And that night, I knew exactly how the final plate would be delivered. With silver, with silence, and with a tip they'd never forget. It wasn't the first time I had been left off the seating chart, but it was the most obvious. That summer evening, the Anderson estate was lit up like a movie set. White tents billowed in the breeze, long tables dressed in pale gold linen stretched across the lawn, and a quartet played Vivaldi softly under a magnolia tree. You could have filmed a perfume commercial there. The occasion, a celebration of legacy, that word again, honoring Dad's 30 years at the firm and Jacob's elevation to managing partner. The invitations had gone out months in advance. I only knew about the event because I saw it posted on my cousin Meredith's Instagram story. When I texted Mom to ask if I should bring dessert, she replied, "Oh, darling, yes, that would be lovely. But just something simple. No official invite. No place card." Just bring a pie, like a neighbor. When I arrived balancing 2 trays of lemon custard tarts I'd made at 4 in the morning, the valet assumed I was catering. I'm family, I said, forcing a smile. He blinked. Oh, this way then. I wasn't on the list. My name wasn't on the board. There were name cards at every table, all arranged like a wedding, but none had mine. I stood there for a minute, scanning, pretending not to feel anything. My fingers tightened around the tray until I thought the foil would tear. Eventually, someone, I think it was Meredith, offered to find me a spot. But before she could, the event coordinator intercepted me. Oh, you must be Lila. The tart's perfect. We've set up a staff table over there by the kitchen. I looked where she pointed. A small folding table behind the hedge near the dumpsters. Plastic chairs. Paper napkins. I could have said something. Could have made a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled and walked there myself. I sat alone. No one noticed. Well, that's not entirely true. Francois noticed. He emerged from the kitchen in a crisp white chef's coat, his graying hair tucked beneath a toque, eyes twinkling as he recognized me. Mademoiselle Lila, he beamed. My muse from the early days. I stood surprised. You're the chef tonight. He nodded. Your mother wanted something European but safe. So here I am. He glanced at the tarts. These are yours. I nodded. He took one bit. It closed his eyes. Perfect balance. Silky. You've improved. That moment, that 5-second acknowledgement, warmed something in me that no family compliment ever had. Francois sat with me for a while, sipping water between courses, telling me about his restaurant in Marseille, his plans to open a culinary school. Every few minutes, a server would rush out with a request from inside. They want fewer anchovies. The wine isn't cold enough. Someone thinks the chicken is too French. Francois would sigh, stand and fix it all. They think food is status, he whispered once, not memory. He looked back at me. But you remember, that is why you cook. And suddenly it all clicked. I wasn't sitting outside because I didn't belong. I was sitting outside because they couldn't see past their reflection long enough to recognize real value. They thought presence meant power. But I had something they didn't. Intention? I hadn't brought my tarts to impress. I'd brought them because love for me had always been edible, and I was done starving for theirs. That's when the plan began to form. Right there between the clink of rented cutlery and the scent of roasted duck. A plan not of revenge but of precision, of tipping the balance back in the most poetic way possible. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel. But it would be unforgettable. The speeches began just as the sun dipped behind the garden hedges. Twinkling lights blinked on overhead, making the setting feel even more surreal, like we were all inside some glossy magazine spread about legacy dining or families that build empires. From my folding chair near the kitchen tent, I could still hear every word. Jacob, my golden child brother, stood with one hand tucked casually in his pocket wine glass, raised like a groom. I just want to thank our incredible parents, he said, pausing for applause, for laying the foundation for all of this, for making sure we knew what excellence looked like, and for showing us that family is everything. Family is everything. I almost choked on my tart. Jacob hadn't called me in months. The last time we spoke, he asked if I could edit a draft of his book proposal, and then ghosted when I sent it back, with honest feedback. But here he was, lifting his glass, smiling that politicians smile, quoting values he never practiced. Next came Mom in pearls and soft blush chiffon. And of course, she cooed. We couldn't have done any of this without our partners in life and in business. And we're so thrilled to welcome Ava into our family, not just as Jacob's fiancée, but as a woman of grace and vision. The camera guy zoomed in. Everyone clapped. No mention of me. Not once. Not when she thanked the family for their support. Not when she listed everyone who helped bring this evening to life. Not even when she praised the desserts. Just silence. It wasn't the first time I'd been edited out of their narrative. But this time, it felt like they weren't just ignoring me. They were actively pretending I didn't exist. Francois sat beside me again during the salad course. You know, he said gently, they don't deserve you. I didn't answer. He lowered his voice. But I think you already know that. I looked at him. I do, It wasn't anger burning in my chest, not anymore. It was clarity. This wasn't about rejection. It was about misplacement. I had spent years knocking on the wrong doors waiting to be let in, forgetting that I could build my own house, serve my own feast, and choose who sat at my table. And maybe it was time they tasted that truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim linen envelope. Inside was a letter I had written 2 weeks ago but hadn't dared to send. Until now. It was addressed to Francois. I know this may seem strange, I had written, but your food was the first thing that ever made me feel safe in this family. I was 10. You made a rosemary focaccia, and when I cried over it, you didn't ask why. You just handed me a second slice. I have no investment in bitterness, but I do believe in gratitude, which is why I'd like to offer something more than words. It was a certified check, $50,000, enough for him to launch his culinary mentorship program for underprivileged youth. He had once mentioned it during a brief conversation over cheese soufflé. I never forgot. Francois opened the envelope slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. When he saw the number, he looked up at me as if I'd handed him the sun. I can't accept this, he whispered. Yes, you can, I replied. Why? Because you fed me when no one else saw I was starving. He didn't say anything, just placed a hand over his heart. And then he stood. He didn't make a scene. He didn't yell. He simply walked to the center of the tent right as the final toast was being raised and called out. Before dessert is served, I would like to thank the only member of this family who showed real class tonight. He gestured to me. Everyone turned. The photographer's lights caught me square in the face, and for the first time in years I didn't flinch. Lila Anderson, he continued, whose tarts you devoured, whose artistry elevated this evening, and who just funded my dream quietly, kindly, and without ego. Unlike some people here, a gasp, a clink of glass. Mom's face froze mid-expression. Jacob blinked. Ava dropped her fork. Francois turned back to me and bowed. The silence after was heavy. Not hostile, just stunned. I didn't say a word. I simply stood, gathered my bag, and walked out, the echo of heels across stone louder than any applause. I had always been told to sit outside. That night, I chose to walk through the front gates on my own terms. Peem. Echoes after the exit. The air outside was cooler than I expected. Crisp with the faint scent of lavender from the garden beds along the driveway. I didn't rush. I didn't have to. The silence I left behind did all the talking. I could still hear murmurs, confused voices trailing behind me, as if people were trying to catch up with a truth too fast for them to process. My name, once erased from seating charts and family toasts, now floated through the tent like smoke. Did she really write that check? Was that Lila? Our Lila? No way. She doesn't have that kind of money. Does she? They didn't know. They never asked. Not when I got my first design contract. Not when my illustration of the New York skyline in bloom went viral and got picked up by an ad agency in Singapore. Not when I launched my own lifestyle brand 6 months ago, quietly online and entirely mine. No one in my family had ever been interested in my success, because they didn't recognize it unless it came with an Ivy League crest, a boardroom title, or a tax bracket they understood. But now they were forced to look, not at me, but through the cracks in the perfect narrative they'd built, one where I was just a fringe character, a polite disappointment too soft to matter. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a quiet hotel overlooking the marina, ordered warm bread, red wine, and a soft jazz playlist. I sat on the balcony, letting the wind braid itself through my thoughts. Then came the texts. First, from Ava. Hey, what was that about? Are you okay? That was kind of intense, Lila. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because that's all she could say. Not thank you for what you did for Francois. Not, I'm sorry we overlooked you. Just concern about optics. The same lens they always viewed life through. Next came Jacob. Seriously, what the hell? You couldn't wait until the dinner was over. You embarrassed Mom. I read his words dry and flat, devoid of curiosity or self-reflection. Then I muted the thread. At 11:34 p. I got an email from Francois. Short. Simple. Lila, tonight you reminded me why I cook. Tomorrow we begin the blueprint for the mentorship center. I already have a name in mind. The Lila Table, a place where everyone has a seat. With love. I closed my laptop and stared into the dark water of the marina, thinking about the irony of it all that the man paid to serve had become the only person who ever truly saw me. In the days that followed, the family chat lit up and Mom posted photos from the event. Glowing lights, flower arrangements, toasts, but I wasn't in any of them. As if by cropping me out of the digital record, they could restore order. I didn't mind. Sometimes silence is the most disruptive sound. A week later, I got a call from Aunt Marie, the one who always sat at the edge of things, who drank a little too much and whispered truths no one wanted to hear. Leela, she said, her voice raw from cigarettes and secrets. That night, I saw it. I saw what you did. And I just want to say, they've always been wrong about you. I didn't cry, but something warm passed through my chest, like a long overdue breath. You were the only one who didn't need to make a toast, she added. Because you made a statement. That line stayed with me, because it was true. While they raised glasses and rehearsed legacies, I rewrote my role, not with speeches, but with action, with gratitude, with quiet defiance. That week, I returned to my studio and began a new series, The Uninvited Table. A set of hand-painted illustrations showing invisible guests at beautiful dinners, empty chairs, overflowing plates, shadows and golden light. I didn't name names, but people saw themselves in the work. It sold out in 2 days. Francoise Center launched 6 months later. The first cohort included 12 teens from underfunded communities, each one given tools, mentorship, and something most of us never had: a seat without strings attached. He sent me photos of the ribbon cutting, and in the background on the wall was a quote he'd painted in delicate cursive. True class is silent. L.A. My initials. Not for the family to see, but for those who had ever been made to sit outside. For those who learned that sometimes the most powerful act is simply refusing to beg for a seat and creating your own table instead. It started with the silence, not the kind that settles after a storm, but the kind that precedes one tense, uncertain, loaded with questions no one dared ask out loud. Ava didn't post for 3 days. That alone was headline-worthy in our circle. No grateful for family captions, no filtered shots of wine glasses or flower arrangements. Just quiet. By the 4th day, she broke it, a carefully curated picture of the evening. But something was different. Her caption read, "Sometimes the most memorable moments aren't on the program. They come from the unexpected, from grace." Vague. Too vague. Comments rolled in fast. Was this about the woman who tipped the chef fee? What actually happened? Lila looked incredible. Haven't seen her in ages. That last comment hit differently, because I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't tagged anyone. But somehow people noticed. My presence, once intentionally blurred, had become the center of curiosity. A few days later, a popular food blog posted an interview with Francois. When someone believes in you, not just your food, but your worth, that's a different kind of nourishment. That woman, she didn't tip me because she wanted to be seen. She tipped me because she saw me. He didn't mention my name. He didn't need to. Word spreads quickly when you disrupt an ecosystem built on appearances, especially when your quiet act of dignity starts to look like a protest. Then the real shift came. An email from Aunt Margaret, the family historian, the woman who archived every birthday, every family gathering, every name in the family tree. Lila, I've been thinking about seats, about space, about how often we decide who belongs where, without ever questioning why. I looked back through old photos. You were always on the edge, never quite centered. And yet you were there holding the camera, holding the memory. She attached a photo from my 8th birthday. Everyone's gathered around a cake. I'm behind them, slightly out of frame, holding a disposable camera, eyes half hidden behind the flash. I hadn't remembered it until then. She ended the email with, "You deserve to be in the center too." I'm sorry, I never said that before. That one made me cry, because Margaret never says anything halfway, and because for the first time someone in that family saw the architecture of exclusion, the way it's built quietly, casually, like a porch, with just one step too high for some to climb. And then came the inevitable my mother's voice on the other end of a phone call I didn't expect. She didn't start with hello. She started with, "You made quite the scene." I let the silence respond first. Then, "You mean the dinner? Or the donation?" She didn't answer. Instead, "You embarrassed Ava, and Jacob, and your father didn't sleep that night." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get defensive. I just said I didn't do anything that wasn't true. She sighed. The kind of sigh that sounds like she's deciding whether to argue or let go. "Why didn't you tell us? About your business? About the money?" "Because you wouldn't have heard me," I said. "You never did." She went quiet again. Then softer. "Your father wants to talk." I declined. Some doors don't need reopening. Some voices only echo judgment, not healing. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need acknowledgement. But I did need space. To breathe. To create. To rebuild. And so I turned inward, not as an escape, but as a revolution. I launched a new art series, Tables Uninvited. I opened applications for the mentorship residency at Francois Center. We received over 600 entries in the first week. Teenagers, single mothers, artists from towns with one traffic light and no art teachers. All of them had one thing in common. They had been seated outside their whole lives. One applicant wrote, "I've never had someone ask what I saw when I looked at the world, only what I could produce for it." I read that line over and over again, because I knew it too well. Back in my studio, I painted a piece titled "The Seat I Built." Myself a long dining table, one side overflowing with people laughing, clinking glasses. The other side, empty, except for a single chair, solid hand-carved and glowing with light. It went viral. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. Because so many people knew what it meant to be near love, but never in its path. I didn't set out to change the narrative. But when you finally choose to sit where you belong, not where you're told, the narrative changes anyway. And as the waves from that single night kept rippling outward, I realized something vital. When they sat me outside, they gave me the clearest view. Not of the table, but of myself. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the city wears gray like a second skin, and every sound seems quieter. I was in my studio barefoot on the cool concrete floor, surrounded by canvases in various states of emotion. The kettle had just clicked off when I heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Not urgent. Not rehearsed. I hesitated. Very few people ever showed up unannounced. My address wasn't public. My studio wasn't a gallery. It was where I worked, where I bled paint into memory. This was not a space for family visits. I opened the door anyway. And there she was, Ava, still dressed like she was about to walk into a brunch meeting, belted trench coat, perfect lipstick, eyes scanning like she couldn't believe she was actually here. "Hi," she said, trying to smile. It faltered halfway. I didn't say anything. "Can I come in?" Another pause. Then I stepped aside. She looked around slowly, as if the air in my studio was made of something foreign, something uncurated. "I saw the painting," she said. "The one with the empty table?" "The seat I built myself," I replied. "Yeah, that one." She looked at it again, leaning slightly. I didn't get it at first. I waited. And then I thought, maybe it's about us. About what we did. I didn't answer. Let her sit with the weight of her own interpretation. "Leela, why didn't you ever tell me how you felt? You just left. Quietly. And now everything's different." I almost laughed. "I didn't leave," I said. "I was never invited." Her face twitched. "That's not true, isn't it?" I gestured around the room. "How many birthdays did you come to? How many shows? When was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? Not what I could bring, photograph, or pay for." Ava bit her lip. Her posture shrank. "I didn't know it hurt you that much," she said quietly. "That's the thing about exclusion," I said. It doesn't scream. It just accumulates, like dust. We stood there in silence for a while, the kind that pulses between siblings who remember different versions of the same past. "I wanted to talk to you before the wedding," she finally said. "I thought maybe we could start fresh." "Then why did you let them sit me outside?" Her eyes watered, but she blinked it back. "I didn't know you were out there until later," she whispered. "And when I did, it was too late. No, I said. It was exactly the right time. You all just weren't ready for who I am now. She exhaled slowly. You looked powerful that night. Like you weren't trying to fit in anymore. I wasn't. Did it feel good? She asked, tipping him like that, in front of everyone. No, I said. It didn't feel good. It felt necessary. She nodded slowly. I wanted to be mad, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew we had it coming. That surprised me. Did you come here for forgiveness? I asked. No, she said. I came here because I didn't want to keep pretending we're okay. And because I think maybe I want to understand. I studied her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't posing. I walked to a corner shelf and picked up a small canvas. It was an unfinished piece. A dining table again, but this time both sides were empty. Just a single chair in the middle. I call this one reconstruction, I said. She looked at it and nodded. Can I come back sometime? She asked. Not to apologize, I warned, but to learn. A small smile. I'd like that. She left a few minutes later. No hugs, no promises. Just something tentative in her eyes, something like beginning again. When the door closed behind her, I didn't cry. I just turned back to the canvas and started painting the second chair. It started the next morning. Not with a confrontation, not with a phone call, but with a string of subtle messages, all variations of the same theme. What you did was cruel. My inbox, once quiet, began filling up with passive-aggressive lines from distant cousins, colleagues of my father, even family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. You embarrassed your family in front of everyone, Lila. There's a difference between making a point and making a scene. That poor chef. He didn't deserve to be used as your pawn. The irony was rich. The same people who didn't blink when I sat outside in the cold were now up in arms because I dared to break the script. Because I disrupted the curated narrative of our family's perfection. I didn't respond to any of them, but I knew where it was coming from. Mom. There was no doubt in my mind. It was her tone, her vocabulary, the carefully chosen guilt. She wouldn't say anything to my face. She never did. But she knew how to poison the well behind closed doors, always with plausible deniability. Still, I didn't expect what came next. A letter, handwritten, delivered by courier. I recognized the looping cursive immediately, my father's. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and formal, like something reserved for a wedding invitation or legal summons. Which in its own way, I suppose it was. Inside was a single sheet. Lila, we are disappointed in how you chose to handle the situation. You may feel justified, but there are appropriate venues for expressing grievances. Public humiliation is not one of them. Your mother is particularly distressed. Ava hasn't stopped crying. We ask that you refrain from further spectacle. Let's speak privately if you're willing to resolve this maturely. Dad. I stared at the letter for a long time. Nowhere in it was there a question about how I felt. Nowhere was there an acknowledgement of why I had done what I did. No apology, no admission. Just a request to retreat, to go back to being quiet, agreeable, polite. I folded it once and slid it under a canvas one titled Curtain Call. 2 days later, someone leaked a video from the dinner. It wasn't mine. I hadn't recorded a thing. But someone, maybe another guest, had captured it on their phone. Me walking to the chef, speaking briefly, handing over the tip. The moment the chef's face changed, the ripple in the room, it spread fast. I didn't share it, but I also didn't stop it. People online didn't know the backstory. They just saw a woman in a white dress surrounded by cold stares doing something unexpected, and they filled in the blanks themselves. Some called it performative, others iconic. A few said I must have been drunk. One viral comment read, "She didn't flip the table. She flipped the power dynamic." I watched the comments roll in with a strange detachment. I wasn't looking for validation. I was watching society react like a mirror, reflecting just how many people had been sat outside by their own families. But my family, they weren't taking it well. Aunt Lydia texted, "You've always been dramatic, but this is new." Uncle Derek left a voicemail. "You need to fix this before Thanksgiving." Even my cousin Miles, the only one who ever really got me growing up, messaged, "Leela, what exactly are you planning?" That made me pause. Because the truth was, I was planning something I hadn't told anyone, not even Ava. After years of keeping quiet, I was preparing my most personal show, yet a full exhibition titled The Family Table. 15 large-scale works, sculptural installations, audio, light, and stories, real ones, told from the seat I had to build myself. The centerpiece was already complete, a literal dining table made from shattered glassware collected from old family events. Each broken piece fused together with molten silver, creating a jagged but beautiful surface. Around it, 6 empty chairs cast in concrete, each inscribed with a sentence I'd heard growing up. "Why can't you be more like Ava? That's not real art. Don't ruin the photo, Lila." The final inscription was on the floor beneath the table. "We saved you a seat. Just not at the table." The gallery had already approved the opening. It would launch next month. I hadn't told my family, but the buzz online, the video, the speculation, it was stirring something. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt visible. Not everyone was ready for that. But I was, because art like truth doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up like rain on a Thursday. The gallery opening was set for a Friday evening. I didn't send my family invitations. I didn't need to. The internet had done the work for me. After the video from the dinner went viral, curiosity about my next move started growing fast, especially when word of my upcoming exhibit, The Family Table, leaked into a few art blogs. Some journalists started connecting dots, speculating that I was the woman in the video. A few even reached out for interviews. I declined. I didn't want to explain. I wanted the work to speak for itself. But when I arrived at the gallery that evening, hair up, black jumpsuit, quiet confidence, I noticed the first crack in my family's silence. Ava was standing near the entrance. Not Mom, not Dad. Ava. She looked beautiful, as always. Sleek hair, tasteful coat, pearl earrings. Her face was a mixture of hesitation and challenge. She was holding her phone in both hands, scrolling nervously. When she saw me, she offered a smile that was strained. "Lila," she said, "I came to see." Her voice for once was small. I nodded. "Then look." I walked past her and stepped inside. The gallery was already buzzing. I saw familiar faces from the art world: collectors, critics, peers, and unfamiliar ones. Students, journalists, strangers with knowing eyes. People stood quietly around the installations. The shattered glass table shimmered beneath soft lights. The concrete chairs seemed heavier now, like ghosts given form. Near the back, a slow-moving crowd circled the final piece. A single chair untouched, facing a projection of family photos dissolving into static. As I drifted toward them, I heard snippets. She turned trauma into architecture. This one hurts. Who sits in that last chair? I didn't answer. I kept walking. Until I saw them. Standing near the center of the room were my parents. Dad was in a stiff blazer, lips pressed tight. Mom wore all black. A silk scarf knotted perfectly, like she was attending a funeral instead of a reckoning. They didn't move. They just stared at the broken table like it might speak first. For a long moment, I wondered if I should approach them. But then I saw it in Mom's eyes. Not remorse, not understanding, just calculation. Like she was working out the optics. I turned away. Ava followed me to the back. "This is powerful," she said. "But did you have to make it so public?" I looked at her. Wasn't sitting me outside already public? She winced. "It was a mistake." "No," I said, my voice even. "It was a decision. A choice. You all made it. I'm just showing what it looked like from where I sat." Silence. Then she said, "They're upset. Are they?" I replied. "Or are they just finally being seen?" Ava didn't answer. Behind her, I saw people gathering near the guest book. They weren't writing names. They were writing stories. I had set out a long canvas and labeled it, "Where were you seated?" Already it was full. At the kids' table. Even after I turned 30. Behind the curtain because my dad said my dress was too much. They made me sit with strangers so the family photo would look neater. I read them with a tight throat. These weren't just my wounds. They were universal ones. And for the first time, I felt less alone in mine. Then a soft voice behind me. "I'd like to make a statement." It was the gallery owner. She motioned me to the front. I hadn't prepared remarks. I didn't think I'd speak. But I walked forward anyway. The room hushed. I stood beside the shattered table, my reflection broken in its surface. I created this work I began because I wanted to understand where the line was drawn between family and performance, between love and loyalty, between silence and survival. I looked up. They say family dinners bring people together, but for some of us, they teach us exactly who we are not allowed to be, where we are not allowed to sit. Murmurs. I continued. So I sat myself here in a gallery, among strangers, among truth-tellers, among those who know that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just stepped back and let the applause rise not for me, but for every story unspoken until now. As the lights dimmed slightly, I saw my parents slip out the side door. Ava remained. She approached the table, ran her fingers along the edge, and whispered barely audible, "Maybe you were always the strong one." I didn't reply. Some things don't need an answer, just a place to finally sit. 3 days after the exhibit closed, I received a letter. A real one, not an email, not a DM, not a viral mention. Cream-colored envelope, heavyweight paper, handwritten address. It was from Marco Varela, the chef from that night. I hadn't seen him since I slipped the check into his palm and left that restaurant like it had never held me. I never expected anything in return. That gesture wasn't meant for applause, it was closure. But now, holding this letter in my hands, something in my chest tightened. Dear Ms. Carter, you don't know me beyond that night. I barely knew you beyond your silent kindness. But I want you to understand what happened after you walked out. Because it changed everything. I was supposed to be fired that night. Your family, or more specifically your mother, had asked to have me removed after the dinner service. Said I made the wrong calls. Too bold with seasoning. Too casual with plating. But I was already tired. Tired of being judged by people who wouldn't recognize integrity if it was plated in gold. Then you tip me more than I've made in months. Quietly. Without fuss. Just a folded piece of paper and a nod. And suddenly I wasn't tired anymore. I quit the next morning, not out of spite, out of relief. Because sometimes it takes a stranger to show you that you're not crazy for wanting to be respected. I've since opened a small kitchen of my own, Varela's Table. It's in a refurbished bookstore, cozy, odd, and entirely mine. We serve 5 dishes a night, nothing fancy, but every single one has a story, and one of them is yours. Thank you. For sitting outside, for tipping generously, and for being proof that art and pain can feed more than just memory. If you're ever hungry for something honest, there's always a seat at my table. Marco. I read the letter twice, then again, and again. It was the first time I cried since the night of the dinner, not from sadness but from recognition. Because for all the family portraits I had been excluded from, for all the birthdays spent alone, for all the chairs I wasn't allowed to sit in here, was one offered freely. A seat not given because of blood, but because of respect. That week I went to Marco's place. It was everything the restaurant had never been. Warm, small, scattered with books and soft jazz. He wore no hat, no pretense, just an apron dusted with flour and hands that moved with purpose. When he saw me walk in, he didn't greet me like a celebrity or a savior. He smiled. Simple. Like we had known each other longer than just a glance in the kitchen. You made it, he said. I'm late, I replied. He shook his head. No, you're right on time. That night, over saffron rice and roasted plum duck, we talked. About food, about family, about silence and the things it can carry if you let it. And then, over the last spoon of cinnamon pear crumble, he asked me something I hadn't expected. Would you be open to doing something together? I blinked. Like an exhibit. Like a dinner, he said. A one-night thing. Your photos. My food. One table. One story. I stared at him. And for the first time in a very long time, I said yes without hesitation. The concept was simple. A dinner called The Table Rebuilt. 5 courses, 5 photographs, each paired to a stage of healing. 1. The empty seat. 2. The closed door. 3. The first crack. Pfeil. The hand reaching back. Pfi. The chair pulled out for someone new. We hosted it 1 month later. Only 10 guests. But every person came with a story and left with something fuller than their plate. The final photo. The chair pulled out was taken in Marco's restaurant. The same chair I had once not been offered. Now it waited for someone who had never been invited anywhere until now. After the event, I posted a single image online. The photo of that chair. The caption was short. Some seats you have to build yourself, but sometimes someone else already has, and they're just waiting for you to show up. It went viral in less than 12 hours. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And as I sat at Marco's bar that night watching guests finish their wine and lean into conversation, I felt a new kind of full, not of rage, not of vindication, but of peace. The kind that doesn't come from being seated at the right table, but from knowing you don't need their table anymore at all. It came through email, not a phone call, not a handwritten letter like Marco's. Just a clean subject line sitting unread in my inbox at 3:27 a.m. Subject: dinner. I almost deleted it on reflex. I didn't recognize the sender immediately. The name was simply Elaine Carter. But the moment I saw the signature at the bottom of the preview pane, I felt something tighten in my gut. Love, Mom. I hadn't spoken to my mother in almost a year. Not since the dinner. Not since I watched her look through me like I was air. Not since she chose silence again when the family excluded me and acted as if nothing had happened. Not even after my exhibition went viral. Not when journalists asked to interview me. Not when my photo with Marco's handwritten letter was published in The New Yorker under the title, "The Artist Who Tipped Her Way Out of Erasure." She never called. Until now. I didn't open the message right away. I went for a walk instead. Through quiet streets slick with morning dew headphones in, but no music playing. I just needed air. Space. Something that wasn't soaked in the scent of old family perfume. When I finally opened the message, it was short. Too short for what it should have been. Emily. I saw the article. I know things haven't been right between us, but I'd like to have dinner. Just the two of us. Your place if you prefer. Or I can make a reservation. No agenda. Just a conversation. Love, Mom. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of exclusion, the quiet cuts, the things left unsaid that became bricks in a wall between us. Just dinner. I showed the email to Marco. He read it once, then again, and said nothing for a long time. Finally, he looked at me and asked gently, "What do you want from her?" I stared at the screen. "I don't know." He nodded. "Then don't go for her. Go if you need it for you." It was the first time I realized that forgiveness doesn't always need a recipient. Sometimes it's a door you open only for yourself. I didn't reply for 3 days. Not because I was playing games, but because I was trying to listen. Not to her. To me. When I finally wrote back, it was simple. "Mom, Friday night. My place. 7 p.m. Please come hungry. Emily." I didn't prepare anything elaborate. Just pasta from scratch. Some roasted vegetables and wine. I picked up from the shop Marco recommended. I didn't want to impress her. I just wanted it to be real. She arrived 10 minutes early. Of course she did. She always prided herself on being punctual to the second. But this time she looked different, not older, not frailer, just unsure. Like the ground she always stood tall on wasn't quite solid anymore. Dinner started quietly. She complimented the sauce, asked about my neighbors, commented on the art on my walls, none of which she had ever asked to see before. And then, halfway through the meal, she put her fork down and said, "I didn't know how much we had hurt you." Her voice cracked just slightly. I thought we were just keeping peace. Letting things stay simple. I didn't realize simplicity came at your expense. For a moment, I said nothing. The weight of it hung in the room like steam. I looked at her. This woman who once made me sit outside, who once praised my sister's every breath, but couldn't name a single award I'd won, and asked, "Why now?" She looked down, then up, and her voice was barely a whisper, because I realized, the world saw you before I ever did. There it was. Not quite an apology, but maybe the closest I would ever get. And somehow that was enough. We didn't fix everything that night, but we started something new, not rebuilding what was lost, but building from here, from truth, From pain that had been seen and now maybe finally heard. 3 weeks passed after that dinner with my mother. 3 weeks of quiet. No calls. No more emails. But somehow it felt like enough. Like I had closed a chapter without burning the whole book. I went back to my routines, editing photos for my next exhibit, drinking overly sweet coffee. Marco insisted on making every morning and sitting on my balcony, watching people rush past their lives tangled in earbuds and timetables. Until one morning when I saw her name, Hannah Carter. Subject line, I saw it. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard from my sister since her wedding the night I captured that photo. The photo of her in a too intimate moment with someone who wasn't her new husband. The photo I never posted, never showed anyone. Not even Marco knew I still had it. I hovered my mouse over the email like it was a live wire. I clicked, Emily, I'm not going to pretend I deserve your time. I just wanted you to know I saw the article. And I recognized the dish. Marco used to make that same tortellini when we were in Rome. You tipped him $50,000. You made sure his name was in every press release. I didn't know you were capable of that kind of kindness. I didn't know because I never took the time to. I won't ask for forgiveness. But I wanted to say, thank you for not posting the photo, for not using your power the way I used mine. That was grace. And I don't think I ever understood it until I saw your silence. Hannah, I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I reread her words. Not because I didn't believe them, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Grace. She used that word, grace. The same sister who once handed me a camera like I was the help. The same sister who let me sit outside in the cold while she toasted champagne. The same sister who pretended I was airy. And now she was thanking me. For what I didn't do? I hadn't expected it to matter this much. But it did. Not because I needed her praise. Not because I wanted an apology. But because it made something inside me exhale. I had held on to that photo like a weapon. A last resort. But in the end, I hadn't needed to use it. Sometimes silence is the loudest kind of justice. Marco found me on the balcony that night. Laptop still open, tears on my face, though I wasn't sure if they were sad or relieved. He sat beside me and didn't ask. Instead, he handed me a cup of tea and said, You didn't need to destroy her. You just needed her to see you. I nodded, because that was the truth. All my life I'd been screaming to be seen through my work, through my pain, through my presence at every event they ignored. And now, I finally was. That night, I opened my camera roll and looked at the photo again. The one from the wedding. Hannah's eyes locked on someone else. Her hand not in her husband's but brushing the lapel of a man she never introduced to anyone. The expression on her face, soft, vulnerable, real, not the rehearsed smiles she gave for the ceremony. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't shocking. It was human. And maybe that's all we ever were. Flawed. Lonely. Trying to be loved in the wrong ways by the wrong people until we learned better. I deleted the photo, not because she asked, but because I didn't need it anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a new email. From the chef. Subject, so about that pop-up restaurant. And just like that, life moved forward. With fewer ghosts. And more truth. And maybe for the first time, peace. The soft launch was supposed to be intimate, 30 guests, a closed courtyard, live cello music floating through the evening air. Marco had spent weeks perfecting the menu, each dish a tribute to something we'd loved in different cities. A creamy lemon risotto from Florence, a cinnamon-slicked lamb from Marrakesh, a delicate pear tart from Quebec City. And me, I was finally not behind the lens. I was on the invitation list, printed, gold-foiled, with my name spelled right and everything. Emily Carter, co-creator and partner. That line, that title, it still made something warm bloom in my chest. For the first time in my adult life, I had stepped into a room not as a silent observer or convenient extra, but as someone meant to be there, someone expected, someone respected. Marco insisted I wear red. You always hide in black, he teased, handing me a wine-colored dress weeks before the launch. Tonight you show up. And I did. Hair curled, eyeliner, steady posture, tall. I walked into the courtyard like I belonged. And it was beautiful. Guests clinked glasses, complimented the food, leaned over candles to whisper how brilliant the idea was, a traveling pop-up that told stories through flavor. My photos hung on linen-draped walls projected in soft light between courses. One man told me it felt like walking through a dream. I almost cried, almost, until I saw her. She stood just outside the garden entrance, hair up in a loose twist, a navy coat cinched at the waist. Her hands clutched a small bouquet of white daisies, wild, imperfect, beautiful. Hannah. I froze mid-conversation. Marco followed my eyes, then simply whispered, "Do you want me to ask her to leave?" I shook my head. Because the truth was, I didn't. She walked slowly toward me, heels silent on the stone. No camera flashes, no spotlights. Just us. "Hi," she said, almost too quiet to hear. "Hi." I saw the feature in Gastronome Weekly, she offered, glancing around the space. "They called you the Quiet Revolution." I smiled faintly. Guess I made some noise after all. She nodded. "I'm not here to make a scene." "I know." She looked down at the bouquet. "These are from Dad's garden. Mom still tends them. I thought you might want some." I took them. Not because they made anything okay, but because they were real. And maybe that was enough. There was a bench tucked beneath a flowering olive tree at the edge of the courtyard. I led her there. We sat in silence for a long while, until she finally said I was cruel to you. I didn't reply. Not out of pettiness, but because I didn't need to fill the space anymore. I didn't need to perform healing for her comfort. She continued anyway. "I knew you were hurting. I just chose not to look." Another pause. "I think I resented how free you were. Even when no one applauded, you kept creating. And I was so desperate for applause that I forgot how to be human." I finally turned to her. "You hurt me," I said. "Deeply. I know. And I don't know if we'll ever be close again. I understand. But," I softened, "thank you for coming." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you for letting me." As the final course was served, I stood to return to the center of the evening. Before I did, I asked softly, "Would you like to stay?" Hannah blinked. "I saved a seat?" I said, pointing toward the head table next to mine. "Didn't know who it was for. But maybe it's for you." She looked stunned. "Even after everything." I smiled gently. "Sometimes we leave a seat open, not because we expect someone, but because we hope they might show up differently." And that night she did. Quiet, humble, changed. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like the girl sitting outside anymore. I was inside, at the center of the table, and I had saved room not for the version of her that had hurt me, but for the one who came to make things right. 2 weeks after the soft launch, the restaurant wasn't just surviving, it was catching fire. Not the dangerous kind. The kind that spreads through word of mouth, glowing reviews, and late-night editorials with titles like "Where Memory Meets Menu" and "The Quiet Genius Behind the Olive Door." That was the name we gave it. The Olive Door. Because under that old olive tree I forgave my sister. Because Marco said it was the symbol of peace and growth. Because the name reminded me that even small, stubborn trees can outlive storms. The morning the call came in, I was in the back office organizing prints for the winter menu. I was bent over a folder of Icelandic snowscapes when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe. Emily Carter. Yes, speaking. "This is Allison Chung. I'm the senior producer for Palette and Place." I blinked. "The streaming docuseries." She laughed. "That's the one. We just wrapped season 4, and we're currently casting creatives for a new concept, one that explores culinary identity through visual storytelling. And your restaurant? Well, it's the most compelling narrative we've seen in years." I sat down slowly. "We'd love to feature you. Not just the space your work, your voice, your story." That night, I told Marco. He grinned. "I'm not surprised. You've always seen stories in things the rest of us miss." "It's a big commitment," I said. "They want me to travel document other chefs, artists, people who use food to reclaim something. Are you hesitating?" I didn't answer immediately, because I was not from fear, but because for the first time I wasn't running. I had roots, a home, a rhythm, and I didn't want to disappear again. Marco seemed to understand before I said anything. He placed a hand on mine. You don't have to choose between stillness and motion, Em. You built this place with a camera, a vision, and 1,000 quiet heartbreaks. The world deserves to see how you turned silence into art. The next day, Hannah dropped by. She brought pastries from the same bakery that refused to cater our childhood birthdays because they were too rustic for Mom's taste. How does it feel? She asked. All this attention. Strange, I said honestly. Do you ever worry they'll forget who you were before all this? I smiled. They never knew who I was before all this. She nodded, more solemn than I expected. Do you? That made me pause. No, I said, because I didn't become someone new. I just stopped hiding. That evening, I sat at the long oak table near the kitchen and began to draft my answer to Allison. I didn't rush. Instead, I flipped through a notebook of old quotes I'd written over the years, things I'd overheard, moments I'd lived through, truths that once felt like scars. One page caught my eye. A line I wrote the night I flew home after being left off the guest list at Hannah's engagement dinner. One day they'll sit at a table I built and ask for a seat. And I'll say yes, not because they deserve it, but because I do. I closed the book. And I picked up the phone. Yes, I told Allison the next morning, but on one condition. What's that? I don't just want to appear on your show. I want to curate it. There was a pause. Then a slow, delighted laugh. Oh, you're the real deal. No, I said, smiling. I'm just the girl they made sit outside who finally built her own front door. There's a photo hanging in the hallway of the olive door. It's black and white, grainy in the way only film can be. A little girl no more than 7 sits cross-legged at the edge of a garden party. In the foreground, a long dining table bustles with family laughter, clinking glasses, a feast in motion. In the background near the hedge, the girl holds a paper plate with one hand and her camera with the other. She's smiling, but not at the party. She's smiling at something just beyond it. I developed that photo when I was 18. It was the first picture I ever took of myself, though no one realized it was me, not even my parents. They used to say, "We don't have time to talk about feelings, just facts." But facts never told the full story, did they? Here's a fact. I was made to sit outside during my own birthday dinner. Here's another. I once tipped a chef $50,000 for feeding me when no one else cared if I ate. And another. I forgave the people who thought I was disposable, not for them, but for me. But if you really want the truth, I don't remember what they served that night on the patio. I remember the flickering tea light, the taste of salt, not from the food, but from the sting in my throat. I remember the scraping sound of the sliding door closing behind me. And I remember the look on the chef's face when I thanked him like he'd never been seen before. I built the olive door with moments like that, not out of bitterness, but as a blueprint for what a family could feel like. The staff eats dinner together before every service. We keep a seat open at the long table marked only by a single olive branch, a reminder that no one should feel like a burden to be tucked away. We feed walk-ins, especially the ones who look like they haven't been spoken to kindly all day. And we teach every new hire one golden rule. If someone's on the edge, invite them in. No questions, no performance. Just the offer of warmth. I still get letters, some from strangers, some from old friends who watched me grow up in the shadows, some, believe it or not, from my family. My dad sent me a note after our restaurant was nominated for a James Beard Award. He wrote, "I never understood what you were doing with that camera. But I do now. You were capturing the things we refused to see." I didn't write back, but I read it twice. My sister Hannah and I speak occasionally. She brings her daughter to the olive door once a month. Last time, her little girl asked if she could help plate the dessert. We let her. She wore an apron that nearly swallowed her whole. And when she carried out the tray of tiramisu with both hands shaking slightly, the entire room applauded. She beamed. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes the healing doesn't look like apology. It looks like not repeating the mistake. If you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you've sat outside once too. Maybe your name was left off the list. Maybe you were told you were too quiet, too soft, too strange. Maybe someone mistook your kindness for passivity. Maybe they used your silence to write their own loud story. If that's you, I see you. And I want you to know, you don't need to fight for a seat at a table that was never built with you in mind. You can build your own, You can fill it with people who pass the bread and listen between bites. You can make space for laughter and quiet. You can serve joy like it's a main course. And when they show up late asking if there's room, you get to decide, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Because your table, it's not about them anymore. It's about you. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more quiet victories, fierce tenderness, and true stories where silence speaks louder than screams. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to build your own table? What did it look like?